Okay, John, I want to set up today's story with a disclaimer. Everything that this person told me made complete sense to them. Like internally, logically, sequentially, everything tracked. The problem was that none of it connected to the actual world the rest of us were standing in.
So it was a coherent narrative, but in the wrong universe.
That's exactly it. A coherent narrative in the wrong universe. I love that. Yes. And then the thing that I find fascinating, actually, looking back, is that I kept trying to find the scene, the moment where his logic would break down and I could go, there it is. That's the part that's wrong. It never broke down. It
Hmm.
was internally consistent the entire time. The problem was none of it was real.
Yeah, this is actually going to be fun to break down today.
I'm counting on it. Episode 7.
Welcome back to John Teaches Sean About His Brain. I'm John.
I'm Sean. Episode 7, and this one's a little different from the others this season because it's not really about a crisis like last episode in the traditional sense. Nobody was in danger. Nothing tragic happened. It's more like a genuinely strange interaction that I've never been able to fully explain to people without them thinking I'm exaggerating.
I have a feeling that I'm not going to think you're exaggerating.
You might. Let's see. Okay, so for anyone just joining, each week I tell John about a real police call that I went on during my law enforcement career. And then he explains the psychology involved, but for the officers, for the people, everybody everybody involved, right? So we've covered a lot of heavy ground this season. Things got, we talked about addiction,
Mhm.
suicide,
Mhm.
mental health crisis. This one's lighter in terms of stakes, right? But I think this might be the strangest thing that happened to be on the job, which is saying something.
Yeah, that's a high bar.
High bar indeed. So let's get into it. So the call that comes in, we've talked about welfare checks a lot. It's a pattern you've probably noticed by now. So a lot of these start as welfare checks. Someone calls dispatch and reports that the police need to go and check on somebody for whatever reason. So someone
Mhm.
reported a man behaving erratically, standing outside of a business. And the behavior was described as standing still for very long periods of time, just like a statue, and then suddenly moving with purpose. Uh, Occasionally talking to something or someone that wasn't there.
Yeah, there's some expected things in this already. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. So already stacking up before I even arrive, right? So I arrive on the call, I get there, and the way that I do this anyway is, you don't drive right up to the person. If there's no quote unquote emergency, the strategy again for me is kind of park a little bit away from the person, but where I can see them. And then I'm trying to, based on the details of the call, I'm trying to establish a baseline of behavior. So I'm just watching what they do for a while because there's no hurry. Nobody's in danger, right? I'm just observing. And this is an average looking guy, maybe 30s, mid 30s probably, but he's standing near a storefront and he's looking up at the sky with an expression of what I can only describe as profound calm. So not distress, not fear. It's just like he's taking it all in.
Yeah, he's taking what in? What's it?
Well, that's what I wanted to know. So I felt like I'd seen enough. I exit the vehicle, I approach, and like we've talked about, my strategy for this part is I always introduce myself with my name.
Mhm.
Officer Hendrickson or any of that stuff is like, I don't know where this dude's at. I just roll up. My name's Sean. And my first thing is I just ask, hey, are you doing okay? And so he turns to me. He's completely relaxed. Just a really what I would describe as a friendly atmosphere. And he says, I'm great. I'm just enjoying the view from up here.
From up here, like while he's standing on the sidewalk?
While, while standing on the flat on the sidewalk, no elevation whatsoever. Like he's not even standing on a box or we are both standing on the sidewalk. And so I said, kind of, I think what you're asking, I just said, from up where? And he gestures around like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And he says, we're pretty high right now. I can see the whole grid from here.
Yes, somebody's pretty high right now, it sounds like. But what does he mean by the grid?
The grid. I didn't know what the grid was either. So now I'm listen, I'm in on this. I want to know what's going on. I asked him to clarify what is the grid. And he explained, and I want to point out very patiently, like he was treating it like I was the one who needed help. In this case, I needed help understanding the situation that he and I were currently positioned at an elevation that allowed him to perceive the underlying structure of the street, which he called the grid. And that from this vantage point that he and I were both on now, you could see how all the streets connected like they're wires.
I see. So he believed that he had like an aerial view from where he was standing at ground level and could see everything. Even though he was on the ground, he had an aerial view where he could see all the streets and the grids and all of that.
Yep. And he completely believed it. I mean, it's so hard to get this across to people who weren't there, but it was with total sincerity. I believed with all of my being, he believed this. And here's where it got interesting for me, because I tried the thing you do, right? Like gently apply a reality test to this. And I said, we're actually standing on the sidewalk right now, not up high. We're not elevated.
Yeah.
And he didn't get defensive. He didn't argue. He just looked at me with what I can only describe as gentle pity. Like I was the one missing something so obvious. And he said, I know it feels that way to you, and that's okay.
That's awesome. So he basically was accommodating what your reality is, even though he knew that his reality was the right one.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Actually, he had room, he had space for both. So my sidewalk, flat sidewalk that I was standing on, and his elevation existed simultaneously for him, and neither one bothered him. Right. So I keep talking to him, partly because I just need to assess whether he's a danger to himself or others. I still have my job to do. But partly, and if I'm being honest, I'm just genuinely curious where this goes.
Yeah.
And so it keeps going, right? So he tells me, still totally calm, that he hasn't taken anything illegal. He's in quote unquote totally sober. And what he's experiencing is just heightened perception. His exact words, heightened perception.
Heightened perception. Yeah, he's right. Yeah, heightened perception.
Heightened perception. And so he described it like he'd unlock some setting that's normally just turned off. And I asked him just directly, have you used any substances today? And he said no, very confidently. And then about, I'm still asking questions. We're talking about 30 seconds in to that. He mentions completely casually that he'd taken, a little bit of a research chemical that a friend gave him earlier in the day. But that's not really a drug. That's just more like a
Mm.
tool.
Yeah, no, that's just a tool. Yeah.
Yeah, tool. It's not a drug. A tool he used to access heightened perception. The contradiction. I'm totally sober. Also, but there's this substance I took that
Yeah.
didn't register to him as a contradiction at all, right? Both things were true in this framework.
Yeah, and that's what you've described, some really specific things that are kind of telling details that we can talk about.
Well, good. I want to talk about this, but it got more specific
Mm.
because then he starts explaining the grid to me in more depth. Okay. So
Uh,
the grid, how the
Good.
streets connected to deeper pattern, how he could see where the city was thinking.
Mm.
And at one point he pauses, right? He looked very seriously. So to where we were standing, uh, to my right, his left, but there was a row of parking meters because we're right by the street at this point, and so
Mhm.
he looks very seriously over at this parking meter, and he says that one's confused right now, and then looks right back at me, and we continue the conversation like he had just made a completely normal observation.
So he was just saying that the parking meter was confused.
The parking meter was confused. And again, I want to be clear, at no point did this feel aggressive or threatening. He wasn't, from his movements, he wasn't moving in an erratic or unpredictable way. His the way so there was, behavior, there's what he's giving off, kind of all of his movements and physicality, his biometrics, everything was just calm. And the way he was talking, it felt like talking to somebody visiting from a country with slightly different physics than where we are. Friendly, calm, just operating on a different rule set, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to put it, and I'm just wondering, like, with his altered state and then you being grounded, like, how did you keep that conversation going without it devolving into some type of an argument or something like that? How did you keep it moving forward without having to agree with him?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So yeah, I decided at this point, I just
Mhm.
asked questions instead of making any statements. So, like, what does the grid feel like? Instead
That's
of
good.
coming at him like, hey, the grid isn't real,
Yeah.
because I learned pretty fast that correcting him, the only thing that that the outcome of this so far had produced was that gentle pity look from him
Because you
and
didn't get
nothing
it, yeah.
productive. But asking him to just because he felt genuinely so bad for me because I didn't get it. So I'm asking him to
Yeah.
describe his experience. I just kept him talking, tried to keep him calm. And at this point, I'm trying to assess whether or not he needs medical attention. So do I need to call, professionals, EMS, and have them come look at him? So
Yeah.
eventually I asked him, because this thing kind of hit, I think it hit the end of this particular road at one point, and I just asked him, "Hey, is there somebody that I could call? Somewhere you could go sit down? Maybe we can get you some water." And
Mhm.
and so here's the thing. When I framed it as, "Let's go somewhere you can rest and keep enjoying this," not, let's go somewhere because something's wrong or you need help. I just framed it like, hey, I don't want this to end for you. Let's get you somewhere where you can keep this going. And I was met with no resistance at all.
Yeah, and hopefully you didn't ask him for some of that the research chemicals either, just so you could go to that place with him, but you worked within his framework instead of against it, so that's good.
And listen, you said that this I'm pretty sure this occurred before the movie Limitless came out. But having
Mhm.
seen Limitless, I'm a little bit, I should have maybe asked him for some of the research, uh,
Exactly.
medicine or whatever you wanna call it, but, uh, but yeah, so I'm trying to work within the framework of his reality while also being, grounded in mine. But so completely by accident, this works out. And I'm saying by accident because we've talked about this in 6 other episodes. Kind of the through line is I don't know what I'm doing. Experience is always something you get 15 minutes after you need it. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to, I'm just trying to do the best that I can with what I got. And so I did end up calling for medics, and I did tell dispatch this message doesn't always get through, but I was trying to get I was trying to be real clear with them that he was not aggressive. He was not threatening, when they show up to just kind of be, but
Yeah.
they showed up. They did great. They evaluated him. They ask him questions like, I'm trying to remember all the questions they ask people, but, what's the date? Uh, who's the president? They ask these I've seen EMS
Yeah.
ask these like standard questions a lot.
Yeah.
One
Mhm.
that I don't know why I'm thinking of it right now. I wasn't even going to talk about this, but one time, not on this call, but in those questions, they said, "Is Mickey Mouse a cat or a dog?" The EMS worker asked that, and I went, and I wasn't being evaluated for mental fitness at the time, and but anyway, so
So did
they
he
take
say
his
the second
vitals,
one's an
right? His
elephant?
vitals are normal. I didn't. That would have been a great. That would have been great. That would
The
have been a
second
great
one's an
answer.
elephant.
But so he's physically fine. Vitals are normal, right? Nothing physically wrong. There's no immediate danger. But they did decide after I talked to them and then they talked to him, that they probably needed to take him to the hospital for at least
Mhm.
for observation, because they didn't
Mhm.
he didn't actually know what he took. And so, the medics are asking about, are you on any medications? No. Are you, blah, blah, blah. Have you taken anything today? And he tells them a similar story to what he told me. And again, the funny thing is, there was a male and a female medic, and the female was asking him these questions. And when he started to describe this research thing that he took that his friend gave him, the guy couldn't help himself. The male EMS guy just kind of glanced at me like, and I kind of nodded like, yeah, I can't help you. So they take him to the hospital, and then he was there for a few hours, and then I he was fine, maybe embarrassed, I don't know, but once whatever he took wore off, it that was that.
So how we've talked before about this, about you having to you're there, you arrive, you interact with somebody who's in some type of a crisis or whatever, and then you drive away, and sometimes you don't ever know what happened or what goes on. So how did you feel driving away from this one? Because this one is different than some of the others, but how did you feel on this one when you drove away?
Yeah, I mean, genuinely entertained. If I'm being honest, it was not a call that I'd ever been on, and not one that I'd been on since. But it's entertained mixed with this lingering question, which is why we're here today, because I still have it.
Mhm.
Which is okay. His experience while it was happening to him was completely real to him. The grid, the grid was as real to him as the sidewalk is that I'm standing on. So what I even the stuff that I've learned from you up till this point about the brain and how things work, but I don't understand what was actually happening in the brain that could produce something that coherent and convincing, built on something. I mean, the idea of the grid and the streets connected and the city, how it's feeling, all of those things are not, I don't want to say they're not real, but you see like the brain was able to construct all of this and he believed it was real.
Yeah. This is, so I love this part of explaining how the brain works and what it does. So you're asking the right question, and it's really interesting. It's a fascinating area of psychopharmacology, and people taking drugs. And so I,
Mm,
yeah, I want to get into this because some of the things you mentioned we can talk about that I think you'll understand better when we're done what was probably actually happening.
mm. Okay. Well, so because I go back to heightened perception, right? Because that's how he described it, and I don't think that's the right word for it, but I don't know what the right word is.
Yeah, well, that's an okay word that we can use, like the heightened perception. It is something. It's
Uh,
a descriptive term that we can use. So that's really the heightened perception is what makes this really interesting. So, if you want to, we can jump right in and start talking about what's going on in the brain.
let's do it. What is
So,
going on in the brain?
let's talk first. I want to talk a little bit about some different drug categories. And obviously, we don't know what this person was taking, but what you are describing, which is his distorted sense of space and elevation. He feels like he's up looking down when he's obviously not. His feelings of being detached, the hidden patterns and the connections he's seeing, like the streets, the grids, the streets. Um, what was something? Oh, he also attributed intention to the parking meter. Like it was confused. So
It was
all of these,
confused. Yeah.
yeah, it was confused. It looked confused. I like that one specifically. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Parking meters do sometimes look confused. Like, what am I doing here? People are putting money in my mouth. What for? I don't understand it. I'm confused.
Mhm.
So these fit the psychedelic or dissociative effects of drugs as opposed to the stimulant effects of drugs. So stimulants are things like cocaine, meth, those types of things speed up the brain. So the person has more energy, faster thoughts, things are just happening and clicking. They talk a lot. Sometimes they're paranoid about things, but reality in those cases, reality stays, I would say, mostly intact. So it's not like they're really detaching themselves from reality. It's just, I guess you could say detached in the sense that maybe they're paranoid about things they shouldn't be. But it's just more things are happening really fast. There's a lot of energy, that type of thing. With psychedelics like LSD, mescaline, they work mainly on uh, by activating the serotonin receptor system in the brain, and this alters reality by producing visual and auditory experiences that aren't there a lot of times. And some of those can be really fascinating. That's the trip people say they take on LSD, where they see all kinds of things and insights to things. And then there's also the disassociatives like ketamine, PCP. These block the glutamate receptors. And glutamate is the main excitatory system in the brain. So they're blocking that. So it's the opposite of a stimulant. And this one is what produces the sensation of being detached from reality, like being separated from your own body or being separated from your surroundings. So you can be standing in one place, but be elevated looking down.
So, okay, hang on, because I'm so sorry. I have so many questions, and I'm embarrassed because for how long I was a cop and a detective, I've been to drug school, but what we don't talk about, or what I didn't learn is, I understand a stimulant, right? Cocaine,
Hmm.
um, uh, meth.
Methamphetamines,
Yeah, I mean, it's all of the things that
speed.
like speed
Hmm.
get you get you ramped up, and then there's
Yep.
depressants, right? Like
Hmm.
heroin, some of the
Alcohol.
others, alcohol,
Hmm.
but then the difference between psychedelics and dissociatives, you said
Hmm.
dissociatives?
Dissociatives.
Um,
Hmm.
so psychedelics, then you said LSD,
Hmm.
mushrooms,
Hmm. Mushrooms. Hmm.
which I'm trying to remember the chemical name for mushrooms. We'll just say mushrooms. Um,
Mescaline.
mescaline.
They're
Um,
mescalines like mushrooms, and there's also some synthetic mescalines.
okay. But what
Mhm.
those do to the brain is they alter. So can you just go a one layer below what you said about these? So what they're doing to the brain is
Yeah, so the serotonin system is the part that it's the part of the brain that's a lot of times, if you're talking about psychoses and things like that, that's associated with depression and things like that, but it activates that to make it more active, and it creates these experiences that are not related to reality. It alters reality. So they hear things like they'll hear music, sometimes beautiful music when there's none around. They'll have these beautiful sceneries of flowers, a lot of things. I've heard it described as like a kaleidoscope effect where there's just so many colors bursting out and so many things
Right.
happening visually. And it's very fascinating to them. And to be able to experience and see those things, it's a lot of altered reality, not just that everything's happening fast. You've got a lot of energy and you want to vacuum your carpets and clean. It's more like, whoa, let's just sit back and look at this and enjoy this. And then the dissociatives, they don't affect the serotonin system. They affect the glutamate system, which is the part of the system that like sends the excitatory signals, and it blocks those. So again, they're slowing down and they're not excited and talking a lot and really into things. They're like, man, look at this. Look at what I'm seeing, right? Look at the grid that I'm seeing in this city. They're like slowing down and taking things in. And yeah, so that's where they're different
I
because
said,
yeah.
I know. I'm sorry. I said one layer. I think, and maybe I'm asking the wrong questions, but this is just how my brain works. Is
Mhm.
we've talked over several seasons now about the senses, right? So,
Mhm.
what you see, what you smell, what you feel, all of those things. And I have a different question. Where would MDMA, ecstasy, where would that fall? Do you know?
That's in the psychedelic. That
That is a
blocks the
psychedelic.
yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Okay, so let me here's maybe I can ask the question this way is so for psychedelics,
Mhm.
you're saying if I go out in the desert and take peyote or take mushrooms or something
Mhm.
that I will see things that aren't there. And and so we've talked about vision a lot,
Mhm.
and vision is light hitting my eyeballs, that data being, we've
Yep.
talked about all this.
Yep.
But now I've taken a psychedelic, I've taken a drug, and that drug is interacting with my body and my brain in a way that now somewhere along that route from my eyeball to my visual cortex or wherever, somewhere along there is data that was not brought in by my eyeballs, was not processed. It doesn't go through the system that we talked about, but my brain still sees it. Do you
Yeah.
understand what I'm asking, or
No,
is that
you're
crazy?
no, you're hitting it right on the head. So when we've talked before about the visual system where your eyes take in information like they capture light, excuse me, they capture
Mhm.
light, then they send that signal back to your visual cortex to build an internal image of what that light has reflected off of. And that's how you have perception. So what we didn't really talk that much about is when we say when your eye captures light and sends it back through your brain and it starts building that perception, to build that perception, single neurons, single cells will receive some information about what's in the environment, and then they'll pass that on to the next cell, the next neuron. And it's I'm saying neuron to neuron, but it's really groups of neurons. And to pass that on, they release a neurochemical like serotonin, like glutamate, like all kinds of different neurochemicals that then the next neuron or groups of neurons absorb so that they know how to respond. And those receptor sites that absorb those are the serotonin receptor sites, the glutamate receptor sites, and now that's what's being altered. So this signal from what the eye captures is working its way through down, from the down the optic nerve into the visual cortex, and then it's
Mhm.
building an image in the head, but it's building an image this is a really good way to explain why we've talked about how perceptions for one person that sees something can be different for another person because everything you see or hear has been built inside your brain. Your brain builds that for you so that you can
Yeah.
experience it. It's an internal model of what your brain, what your receptor systems have taken in. Your brain builds that and says, here's our best estimate of what's out there. But now you're taking drugs, and now some of these receptor sites are getting blocked. So the message that's coming through is altered. It's not the same signal coming through. So now your brain just works off what it has, and it builds this new model, this new image of what's in the world out there, but it's altered because of the drugs you're taking, because some of the receptor sites are blocked, some are activated, meaning they're more likely to take in neurotransmitters than others. And yeah, it just changes how the system functions. And so now your perceptions are based on how the system functions. Now it's functioning differently. So your internal perceptions are going to be different.
I got it. What the way you just explained it, I can now somewhere along the, you know, the neurons are passing a note to each other, but they're doing it
Yeah.
through this chemical,
Hmm.
and somewhere this drug, uh, kind of like writes its own message and just starts
Hmm.
somewhere in the chain starts handing the note,
Yeah.
and that this makes complete
Yeah.
sense to me now.
And so then like psychedelics and dissociatives, they both of those, but in a little bit different way, but both of them disrupt the brain's ability to hold a single stable kind of agreed upon model of where you are and what's real. Those
Yeah.
both kind of disrupt that ability because normally we can kind of understand where we are and what's real, and that gets altered.
And so the reason that I brought up MDMA, I've never taken it, but I've had people who were on ecstasy describe it, and I've seen it in
Hmm.
movies and TV shows too. But I've actually dealt with someone who is currently under the influence of MDMA,
Hmm.
and the description is always like my senses are heightened. Going back to this
Hmm.
guy, when
Hmm.
he said heightened perception, it's like they're describing their sense of feel
Hmm.
and how they can I'm trying to remember the example that one person gave me, but like when they were feeling something, they could feel it more deeply than, and I don't mean
Oh yeah.
emotionally. I just mean, the fibers on the
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
they could
Yeah.
feel. I'm probably not explaining it right, but it does seem like
No, you're explaining it exactly right. Yeah.
the heightened sense of their uh feel, see, touch, smell, all of that. Uh it gets
Yeah.
heightened according to them.
Yeah. So, and I think that they're like it, that you said that this person said they had taken some research chemicals,
Mhm.
which, and so William James, you've probably heard of William James. I hope I've mentioned him before. He's like known as the father of American psychology. So we should mention him if I'm going to talk about
Uh,
psychology. But
okay.
he was around in the late 1800s, early 1900s, about the same time Freud was.
Okay.
And William James was taking psychology a little bit more towards the experimental side, and Freud was taking it more towards the clinical side, trying to diagnose. But William James was trying to explain how the brain works, and he wrote about this in the I think the maybe the early 1900s, but late 1800s, early 1900s. He wrote about what he called the noetic quality of altered states, and it's this, he described it as this powerful sense that you're not merely feeling something, but it's a sense of knowing something. It's accessing a deeper truth about the world that carries this sense of authority with it. And
Hmm.
he arrived at his understanding and his descriptions of this in large part by experimenting on himself with drugs. So that's an actual research chemical because he was using his research, he says. But he used nitrous oxide, and he would
Oh.
explain his feelings while taking this. And the point is that feeling insight into something is something that, like, if you feel like, oh, I've got this new understanding, this really deep knowledge now and deep understanding of the world that that I have, that's something that the brain produces on its own. and that's entirely independent of truth and whatever else is happening.
Mm.
It's the brain's sense of that.
Huh.
So
Wow.
if you think about like
It
alcohol impairment, we've talked about that earlier in the
yeah.
season. If you think about that, people know, like with alcohol, they know when they're starting to get like, I'm in an altered state right now. Like I'm fine, I feel fine, but you can kind of sense it. But here with dissociatives and sometimes psychedelics, but especially dissociatives, it's the feeling that um, people feel elevated or like their cognitive abilities have been sharpened, and it's kind of an upgraded
Mhm.
version of themselves. So that's the
I could
difference, and
use
it's
that.
yeah, that
I could
exact.
use
Well,
that for
what
me.
was the movie?
Limitless.
Limitless. I read the book actually before the movie came out, and
Oh.
then I saw the
Oh,
movie.
yeah.
I like the book a little bit
Mhm.
better, but I'm one of those people probably just because of the extra detail. But it's this really interesting concept. I love this concept of trying to find a way to be just a little bit better, to think clearer, to know more, to have that deeper understanding, to see patterns and things in the world better than you normally would, which would give you a real advantage normally, unless it's
Yeah.
a research chemical that maybe
Ye
doesn't give you that advantage.
yeah. Again, I don't wanna drag us off track, but as always happens, we're talking and things pop into my head.
Mhm.
I went on another welfare check,
Yeah.
but it was, I talked to this guy and, he had done methamphetamines
Mhm.
and he had not slept in several days. I don't remember the days because I wasn't prepared to talk about this. It just popped in my head. But
Yeah.
my point was, he had a motorcycle in the driveway of this house, and he had taken it, he had stripped it down and then rebuilt it in his bedroom over the course of like 4 days. He just
I
that's
tell you, you
all
gotta
he
have
did.
something to do. You gotta have something to do.
He took he took his motorcycle apart and then rebuilt it all in like 4. Anyway,
I'm sure
anyway,
that
so,
made perfect sense at the time too. Like, there was a
sure.
reason I have to do this. I have
Mhm.
this deep
Yeah,
insight into why this would work. So,
yeah,
one of yeah, one other thing I was wanting to mention was the default mode network. We've talked about it before, the
me
DMN.
yep,
It's kind of the general
mhm,
overall of your brain, the overall kind of system that your brain runs on. And many researchers now are thinking that the DMN is probably closely tied to consciousness. So if that's true, it'd be interesting to look at what drugs do to the DMN system.
yeah,
It's the system that keeps the brain kind of active and running when you're not doing any task in particular. So you're just kind of
mm,
chilling, but your brain's still going. So you're usually in those times thinking more about yourself. So it's heavily involved in self-referential thinking. And it's probably, I think, one of the best candidates for a biological basis or biological description of what it means to be a self or a person. Like, you can recognize that I'm different from everything around me, and I have these certain attributes, and this is me. I'm a single individual. There's been nobody like me in the past. There won't be anybody else. I am this individual person. And when people take psychedelics, it quiets that system down so that it's not functioning. So researchers have looked at this. They've put people in, they've given them like a research grade of mescaline, and then they put them in a scanner. So this isn't the research, I guess it's a research chemical, but a research grade of mescaline. They put them in a scanner and they look at DMN activity and it drops. And
mm,
what was
hmm,
interesting is that the more it drops, the more the person starts to report ego dissolution, which means the boundary between themselves and their world starts to dissolve. So this feeling of self, like I am this individual person that's separate from the world, that starts to dissolve, and now I'm starting to become a part of the world. So what that can mean, I was thinking about this in relation to the person you're talking about. And so what it can mean is that feeling of elevation, of being up higher, could have, was obviously real to his nervous system. And we've talked about perception and how the brain processes that. But one of the things that I think we've talked about in prior episodes we haven't talked about today is that the brain is this prediction machine. It gives its best guess about what's happening in the world right now, and then it uses its senses, its sensory systems to corroborate what it thinks is happening or what it's predicting, or to correct what it thinks is happening. And so what you get is in the brain is your brain weighs its predictions against the incoming evidence about what it's predicting, and then it can correct it
Yeah.
if needs be. But when you take drugs, it tips the scale. So now your internal predictions get weighted much more heavily than the information coming in, is the idea behind the DMN network. So now your predictions seem to be what's true. And as your brain starts to have these predictions and they are validated, then it just opens it up. Then if that prediction is true, it might mean that this one is true and this one is true. So drugs, tip the scale of that. And
And so is that feedback or feed forward? That's feedback,
that's
right?
that's feedback from the world.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So
The
your brain makes a
predictions would be
prediction.
feed forward.
That's feed forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So your brain makes a prediction, and
mhm.
then the system runs, and then input comes back,
Your
and
sensory
that
system
feedback,
brings in input. Mhm.
and then you can kind of adjust based on that. But you're saying if this gets tamped down a little bit, then I have the prediction,
Mhm.
whatever that might be, and the
Yeah.
information coming back, the feedback. I don't know that it supports it, but it doesn't change it.
It does. Yeah, because
So
normally it's weighted where the feedback gets a pretty heavy weight. Like if the feedback's pretty strong, then your brain goes, "Okay, that prediction is wrong." But
yeah,
if that doesn't have very
yeah,
much weight and the prediction gets more weight, and it's not that your brain is just trying to predict these wild things, it just is trying to make guesses and estimates of what's happening. So there's been research studies to show this, but it's where they'll pair kind of like Pavlov and the dogs, but they'll pair a light with a tone. So every time a light comes on, you hear a tone. It's really, really faint. And they've found that after pairing those a few times, that you show a light and you don't sound a tone after, but people still hear it because
you
those are
hear
paired
the
together. So your
tone.
brain is predicting there's going to be a tone right after the light, and there's not, since the volume is really low, there's not enough feedback to overrule that prediction. So the prediction holds and says, yeah, there was a tone there. So now when you're on these drugs and this guy gets this prediction of, maybe I'm seeing the street, maybe I'm elevated, but there's not enough signal to say, no, you're not. You're standing on a flat sidewalk. So the brain starts to go, okay. And then here's the really interesting part. We've talked about how the on channel, the conscious part of the brain versus the back channel, the non-conscious part. The on channel is the storyteller, right? It tries to make sense
Mhm.
of everything that's going on. So it takes information and then it tries to make sense of it and it tells a narrative. So the experience of being elevated, since that's what the brain says, we're elevated, now the on channel has to make sense of that. It doesn't go back and say, are you sure we're elevated? Because it doesn't have a way to check that on its own. Your self narrative just takes what the brain feeds it and makes sense of it. So it can't go back and say, wait a minute, we're not really elevated. It goes, oh, we're elevated. So now I've got to make that fit with everything that's going on. So once the brain locks in on a perception like we're elevated, even if it's based on a false premise, the rest of cognition keeps trying to run normally around that. So reasoning, logic, language, memory, social interactions, skills, all of those stay intact and work like they normally do. So self-narration, again, doesn't audit any of that or check it. It just takes what the brain's giving it and builds the story around it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's
Huh.
untouched by psychedelic drugs. So it's not, the drugs don't affect self-narration in the same way that they affect perception. It's just narrating about inputs that have been pharmacologically corrupted, I would say.
Oh, oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because
Okay, I'm not
it's
even
the
gonna try to
drug that
say it, but yes.
it's the drug that corrupted it. So, but now they're basing their story, making sense of that. So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
really it's fascinating.
That is fast. Yeah, that's fascinating. Uh, okay. So I think I got drugs. I mean, sorry. I think I understand drugs. Words matter. And then the DMN.
hmm
Okay.
Default mode network,
Default mode network.
like your
Um,
conscious awareness.
yeah. What else?
So one of the
Yeah.
thing I wanted to talk about touch on a couple more things if we have
Oh yeah.
time.
We have
So
plenty of time.
one of them was, yeah, I'm sober. And no, I haven't taken any drugs. I'm sober. And the other one was the parking meter is confused. I wanted to talk about those two things because I love those in the sense of I love them on how they help make it easier to describe how the brain works.
Okay.
So starting first with no, I'm sober. Like, why would somebody say they're sober if they've taken drugs? And I think there's a couple of reasons why. Well, research says there's a couple of reasons why people um, make their own self judgments about what they're getting ready to take. So they categorize things. So research chemicals are not really a drug. Like to a
Because
person, they
drugs are illegal.
yeah, they're illicit and they're illegal, and I'm familiar with them. It's PCP, like you said. It's
Huh.
it's
Yeah.
ecstasy. I know what those are, but
Yeah.
this wasn't that. These are just research chemicals. They're not really a drug. So when you take one, you're like that wasn't really a drug, and they're purposefully marketed that way, like bath salts, which I know they're actually a stimulant, not a psychedelic. But people
Yeah.
with bath salts, you can go. Yeah, I don't think you can anymore, but for a while you could go buy them in like a quick trip, maybe not a quick trip, but
Yes.
a quick
Yeah.
stop
No.
store.
You could go
Because
to a store and buy bath salts at
yeah,
one
because they're
time.
to put in your bath to help you feel,
Correct.
and so they're marketed that way. And then
Mm.
like psychedelics, and I'll be honest, I looked a couple of these up because I'm not that familiar with the drug world and the terminology used. But you
Mhm.
probably heard of N-Bomb and Smiles. Those are things you can
Oh,
just
yeah.
buy, and those are psychedelics and
Mhm.
Nexus. And then one I had not heard of. I'd heard of the N-Bomb and Smiles and Nexus, but there's one MXE or Mexi I had not heard of.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you've heard of that? Okay,
Next thing. Yep.
that's a dissociative, and
Mm.
they're marketed as herbs or as other things, not as drugs. So then if a
Mhm.
person takes that, and sometimes they're even marketed as research chemicals. These are research chemicals that are being used. So it's not really a drug.
Yeah.
Um, that's one thing that people could say, no, I haven't taken a drug. I just did bath salts or I just did an N-Bomb. I'm not taking
Mhm.
drugs. And then because I didn't go meet somebody on the
I was
corner
just gonna say that.
to buy
I
a plastic baggie, I went into the Quick Stop and got
Yep.
this. And
Yep.
then the other part that the reason why people will say that, and to me this one's more interesting, is that we've already talked about it, but once you take these research chemicals, they don't really feel like you're impaired. Like it's not a drug that impairs me. It's an enhancement. So
Right.
this enhances my thinking. I all of a sudden have these deep insights and I love this. This can't be a drug. So I think that's part of it. And it's really hard to convince people that they've taken a drug when they're looking at it that way.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
why you could say, yeah, I'm sober and I haven't taken anything. And then 30 seconds later, you said and mentioned, yeah, I took some research
I
chemicals. Like you just said that you were sober and yeah, I think that's part of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any thoughts from that or,
Well, oh, no, I mean, yeah, that makes
okay.
complete sense, and as soon as you started down that road, you got to it before I could, but I was thinking about we said it's illicit, it's illegal, but yeah, I didn't go find some shady dude on a street corner and
Yeah.
buy this thing, like, this is used for research, my
Yeah.
buddy's a scientist or whatever. So, yeah, okay, so can we just talk
Yeah.
about the parking meter real quick?
Yeah.
That,
Let's talk about
uh
that.
okay, so the parking
This is
meter
my
is
favorite part of
confused.
the story, actually.
That's why I
I
wanted to
love
get it
this.
in. I just go ahead.
Well, so
Uh,
there's something called apophenia, and that's the perception that there's something meaningful in the world. Like there's meaningful patterns, there's meaningful connections, meaningful intentions that you find in things that don't carry any of those things. So this happens in even in early stages of psychosis when the world starts to feel like it's saturated with some type of hidden significance.
hmm.
And it's
Okay.
yes, so there's a term for it, apophenia.
A- I'm just apophenia.
Mhm.
Okay.
And
Okay.
here's what we think is happening because this is, you know, I don't want to fall into the trap of just glossing over things, just throwing out some words like apophenia or talking about some stuff and makes it sound like that we know everything about the brain. The brain's easy to figure out. I think there was a philosopher and researcher, I don't know, a few hundred years ago, but was talking about the brain and said if the brain was easy enough, if the brain was simple enough that we could understand it, we would be too simple to understand it. So it's like this idea that the brain, whatever complexity level it's at, our knowledge comes from that complexity, so we can never get above that complexity to see how things are working. So it feels like that we've understood some things, but a lot of times, we're just scratching the surface. So this is what we think is happening, and it's called aberrant salience. And that's where that's the so aberrant means like if you see an aberration, it's like a ghost or something. So this is
Okay.
like an aberration of something that's important, of salience. Salience means something is really important. So it's an aberration of importance. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter in our brain that generally, for the most part, tags what is significant and what's not. So it says, this is worth our attention. So it gets tagged with dopamine. And anytime that tagging system starts to run, then we start to see things as being important. And it usually only runs when something really is important. But if you're taking drugs, it can increase the dopamine in that system. So it'll start firing when there's nothing contextually really there or appropriate that needs to be tagged. But your brain starts to tag neutral things as having importance and meaning.
Importance.
And that's
Okay.
how the parking meter was tagged as significant. And also same things for deeper meaning patterns of like the streets and the grid and things like that. Um, but we've talked before. I think we talked about this maybe in like season 2 or something, but about that we have a system in the brain that tries to find faces in things. It tries to find emotions and meaning in things, and
Hmm.
it can apply it to inanimate objects like when you're sitting there eating your toast for breakfast and you look over and your toaster is just blankly staring at you. It's like, what are you staring at? Type of thing. Cause you can
Yep.
almost see a face in the toaster or your socks are laying on your bed and you look down at them like, don't judge me. I'm like, what are you
Mm.
doing? Because you kind of see a face or you attach meaning to those things. So we have that part of the brain that does that. And now add that to the heightened state and you start to say, oh, that parking meter, that looks kind of like a face. And, parking meters kind of sitting there like, the parking meters do look confused when you see the face
Hmm.
in them. They
Yeah.
do look confused. So I love that part of it that that's really important. That parking meter is super important and it looks really confused right now. And that he pointed that out, I
Yeah.
think is awesome.
See, I was just finding the entertainment in it, but didn't appreciate this part.
That's
This is why we're here.
that's still the
Is
entertainment part for me.
well,
But
yeah, yes.
But then the street I have one last thing. I promise this is it. Because
Oh no,
just
this is great.
hearing what you're saying, also when you're talking about the streets and the streets being a grid, there was a researcher. I should have looked this up. I can't remember the name of the researcher, but I think this was in the early 1900s as well. But he found that he was researching. This wasn't William James, but it was somebody else in that era, I believe. found that people that were on drugs saw geometric patterns, and the patterns they described were fairly reliable. And this person wrote down 4 different patterns that people commonly see, and one of those was the lattice pattern, which relates to grids like honeycombs,
Mhm.
checkerboards, those types of things. And when you said this person saw the grid in the streets, because drugs can cause that sense of where you're starting to see and understand things in grids, maybe like the Matrix, I don't know, but I don't know if you're seeing numbers drop down, but you see those types of things. But then more recently, some mathematicians found that those patterns that this researcher named, these 4 patterns, specifically the grid pattern, corresponds to the actual wiring of the primary visual cortex. So when the visual cortex, which is the first area of the cortex that receives input from the eye, so it's the
Mhm.
first area to start really trying to find lines. Its job is to find lines, to find shadows, which creates lines. So the primary visual cortex only finds lines in the scene, and then it passes forward those lines, and later color gets added, motion, other things get added to
Mm.
it. But if the visual cortex is looking for lines, and they found that those patterns correspond to the networks of the primary visual cortex. So when the visual cortex, this was kind of the idea, and again, this is a fairly agreed upon idea, even though it's hard to prove everything. But the agreed upon idea is that when the visual cortex becomes spontaneously active, then the geometry that you're seeing at that point is essentially the architecture of your own visual
Oh,
cortex, just projected outwardly. So that
yeah.
person is not only, maybe that's the spontaneous activity is probably from drugs, and this person is seeing the lines that his visual cortex is creating projected outwardly. So this person might have been seeing those patterns and then just interpreting that. The brain's the storyteller saying, well, that grid you're seeing, that's the streets through the city, and they have meaning and they're thinking and all this other stuff that's attached to it, which is really fascinating. You had so many parts in this one story that tie into so many things the brain does. I love it.
I didn't appreciate any of it until today. So
Yeah, this is what I love about hearing. I think this is a really good format we're doing, because you're telling about real life experiences you've had with people, and then we get to kind of break that down into what's happening in the brain. I love this format.
I'm really enjoying it. Sincerely, this is great.
Good.
Okay, it's time for your
So
question.
yeah, so I was going to say my question
This
that I
time I
always
knew it was
ask.
coming.
You're ready for it.
This
So,
time I knew it was coming.
same question as always. Does knowing this change how you think about that call?
It does. In a fun way, though. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, because it it turns what felt like just a really weird story into something that now, sitting here, actually makes complete sense mechanically.
Mhm.
Like you just said, explaining how the brain works, how drugs affect the brain. Excuse me. But I love that there's a real explanation for the grid. You brought up
Mhm.
the grid and the parking meter, and it doesn't make any of this any less funny to me, but it does make it a lot less random.
Yeah.
And there was a logic running underneath the absurdity the whole time.
Yeah, and that's really good, because I think that might be kind of the theme. That's almost everything we cover on this show, has that. It has this surface that sounds kind of weird, but then you look underneath and there's this logical machinery in the brain that's running underneath all of it and
Oh,
describable.
putting that on a shirt. That's the one.
Okay, but I get some of the money you make off that. I get a small part of the money. Some
Oh,
revenue sharing for those shirts.
we'll negotiate the profits, I
Okay.
guess. Uh, okay, so that's episode 7. Next week, episode 8, we're talking about eyewitness memory
I love this. Yep.
and why two people can watch the exact same event and walk away with two completely different completely sincere, but completely different accounts of what happened. It's going to make you question every argument you've ever had about what actually happened.
Yeah, there's probably no way to put that episode in front of this one, is there? Because I love that's one of my favorite topics is eyewitness memories and how people develop those. So I can't wait. I can't wait to talk about that. So I guess I'll see you then.
I will see you then. Thank you, John.